G'day, Chris from Adelaide here. This is part one of my trip to the United States, where I meet up with my cousin Pete. But first stop, Sydney.
Here we are, Double Bay Park, on a Thursday afternoon, 7th of September.
Great, Nick could put me up for a couple of nights.
Absolutely.
Flight to America tomorrow, early tomorrow morning.
And then you're going to venture through the Four Corner States.
Yeah, coming up will be New Mexico, Pete, and he's organised a trip around Arizona, Utah,
Wow.
maybe Colorado as well. But
Yep.
yeah, I'll be seeing a lot of New Mexico and experiencing some of their food there, which I think is meant to be quite hot, but I'm a bit nervous.
Oh, New Mexico, yeah, the Mexican chilies. You have to be eating the chilies and the... Will it be kind of like Mexican food a bit?
I think so, but I think it's new Mexican food, so it's like it's a bit different apparently. I've been told, and I've been told by Pete that if you want to be like a local, you have to order things Christmas, which means you have the green and the red sauce. And the following day, flew out to New Mexico via Los Angeles. There was a little bit of a delay on the airfield before we got going. Flying over LA, it brought back memories of my trip here in 2011, and I briefly visited Venice Beach, which you can see down there. Flying over New Mexico, it looked like an alien landscape with all the messes. I wore a face mask because there was a lady in front of me coughing. I was just being cautious because COVID was still around. But Pete was there to meet me at the airport. I'm now looking for Ruby, is it?
Ruby Tuesday. Ruby Tuesday after the Rolling Stones song. Ode to Australia.
Pete is my cousin who I only met up with 9 months earlier for the first time as an adult when he was visiting his parents in Brisbane, Australia. The centre, CBD over there, the central.
Yeah, that's kind of like downtown area right there. So that's big Albuquerque downtown. University of New Mexico is basically just off to the right there. So right now you're kind of entering kind of reservation land basically.
Arriving now in Pete's home, and it was a beautiful, spacious home, and I can't thank Pete enough for accommodating me and showing me around for 5 weeks. It's a traditional adobe home, and he has a walled garden, and I couldn't help but film some of the bird life. And here, looking out from my bedroom at the neighbours' horses, and in the distance you can see the mountains and the mesas, which are a result of ancient lava flows. After a few days of acclimatising to the new time zone, we headed off on our first big tour of Arizona and Utah. There's the Sandias behind the casino. We're going to meet up with a couple of Pete's mates, or should I say buddies, dudes? I don't know what's the American version. But before meeting up with Guy and Steve, Pete and I stopped off at the Petrified Forest National Park. There was various places where we could stop and look out over the painted desert. See some of the structures here also were in the adobe style. Here there was a newspaper rock we could look out on, and there was over 650 petroglyphs here, dating back perhaps 2,000 years. So what was this place called? Blue Mesa.
Blue Mesa.
Oh. I'm guessing that's a petrified
Yeah, absolutely.
tree stump or something.
Yep.
About 216 million years ago, these trees died and fell into a river where they were buried under silt and mud and ash. Eventually mineral-laden water percolated through these layers and the tree absorbed these minerals and quartz crystals formed, replacing the wood material. Before we arrived at the petrified forest, I was thinking, yeah, sure, maybe there's a couple of trees there, but this petrified wood was just everywhere. Next we continued on to the south rim of the Grand Canyon, where we would eventually meet up with Guy and Steve. Okay, we've just arrived at Mather Campground, which is near the southern rim of the Grand Canyon. There's Guy and Steve in the background. And the following morning at the Mather Campground. I'd wish I'd introduced Guy and Steve on camera, but I didn't really want to shove my camera in people's faces that I've just met. So instead, most of this video is of scenery and the wildlife. First time I'd seen an elk, and they're a big animal. I'd seen a squirrel before in New York Central Park, but yeah, they're not afraid of people, yeah. Walking along the south rim, this is something I saw a lot of, people risking their lives to get that social media post. I did read while I was over in America that a young boy had fallen about 100 metres, survived fortunately, but he was just trying to get out of the way of someone taking a photograph and yeah, slid down the side. There's a bridge crossing the river. Guy, Pete and myself walked the south rim from Mather Point to the village, while Steve explored the area on his bike. Here's some of Pete's great photography that I've dotted throughout the video. Mather Point, and also the campground, is named after Stephen T. Mather, who was an avid outdoorsman, conservationist and born marketeer. Mather was one of the best advocates of the national park system, and he was also the agency's first director. Looking down into the Grand Canyon, you're looking back nearly 2 billion years. And as someone who's studied geology for a few years in university, I've found it very fascinating. Everything from the top layer, which is about 270 million years old, and then looking down through the different sandstones, limestones, shales, and each layer indicates a different climate and a different environment that these layers were formed and deposited in. And then you've got a layer which is stromatolites, which is 1 billion years old, which is microbial mats, some of the earliest life forms on the planet. And then the deepest layers, you're looking back nearly getting up to 2 billion years, you've got igneous rock, you've got granites, and then the oldest rock, which are metamorphic rocks, which were formed under incredible heat and pressure. Hopi House here is modelled after centuries-old villages on the Hopi Reservation. Today various tribes demonstrate traditional dance and art here. We stopped here at the El Tovar Hotel for a light lunch and met up with Steve.
There's nobody on. Maybe they took them down there and left them. Yeah, I see a few people trying to go down there.
Man, it seems like it's late in the day.
This is called the Bright Angel Trail, and apparently it goes all the way to the northern rim as well. You can do day hikes to the 1.5 mile rest house, 3 mile rest house and Indian Garden. I think I would have been very keen to do this trail when I was younger, but you'd have to be very fit, I think. I've kept most of this shot in so I can just vicariously follow the path with my eyes and imagine what it would be like to hike. There's the 1.5 mile rest house, I think. You can see a little hut with the solar panels on the roof. Lots of switchbacks, you can look down and see the people walking up, and quite a few walking down still as well. And it's getting late in the day, so perhaps they're just going to that first rest house before coming back. This is the last section of the path going up through the rock there, up towards the village. We headed back to the campsite and rested for a while. Then Peter and I realised the sun was setting, so we raced over to get some shots of the Grand Canyon at sunset. This was an interesting area which was set aside for people to exercise their First Amendment rights. I'm not too sure how often it's used, but there it is. And this is the Visitors Information Centre as the sun sets on our first day at the South Rim. So today we leave Mather Campground and head to Flagstaff, but before that we're going to do another walk around the rim of the southern rim. And yeah, it was good last night. Slept well, and yeah, there was you may see a Tesla in the background that arrived a couple last night, and there was a bit of confusion on if they on which campground they were on, so whether it was double booked or what, but yeah, we accommodated them and they were able to camp at the same site. So, on to Flagstaff. Well, rim walk first and then on to Flagstaff. The weather conditions were quite different this day. There's a bus that services that section of the South Rim Trail from Bright Angel Trailhead through to Hermit's Rest. It's about a 7-mile section, so in getting off we were able to enjoy the views and we didn't have to walk the whole 7-mile length. The name Hermit comes from a Canadian-born prospector who staked claims below the present-day Hermit's Rest. Before 1928, Bright Angel Trail was privately owned. So to service the growing tourist trade, Santa Fe Railroad built a trail from Hermit's Rest down into the canyon to avoid that private toll on Bright Angel Trail. The mighty Colorado, cutting its way through the Grand Canyon. Hermit Trail was once considered the finest trail in the Grand Canyon. After walking through the rain, we made it to Hermit's Rest and enjoying a nice hot chocolate. Leaving now the Grand Canyon South Rim Village, the rain was starting to clear. We stopped off at a Little Colorado overlook on Navajo tribal land. There were stalls here where you could buy genuine Navajo artwork and jewellery. I picked out a bracelet here to bring back to Australia for my partner Charmaine. Our next destination was Flagstaff. Pete had his bluegrass music playing, and that's one of the main reasons we were heading to Flagstaff, was to go to a bluegrass music festival. Steve's sister Jean and her husband Eddie very kindly put us up for a couple of nights. Jean is a talented artist who works with stained glass. Knowing how much Charmaine loves lead light and stained glass, I took plenty of photographs of the garden and artwork. Here we go to Sedona. Now we're going to have a look at Oak Ridge Canyon before going to the Bluegrass Festival later on this afternoon. Yeah, it's just me and Guy heading down to Sedona. Pete had gone to Pickin' in the Pines, the Bluegrass Festival, for the whole day. Guy and I planned to meet up with him and Steve later in the day at the festival.
Oh, that was a skunk.
Oh.
Can you smell it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I saw it in the road.
Never got to see a skunk, but I certainly smelt one. On our way to Sedona, we stopped off here at Flying Rock. Down here is Flying Rock. An apple orchard.
Yeah.
Under the cliffs of the Oak Creek Canyon. Here we see some of the 250 to 300 million year old rock layers that we saw in the Grand Canyon. The red in the cliffs caused by the iron oxide. Guy and I continued to Sedona, where we stopped for lunch and explored the main street. I've got to say, Sedona was perhaps the tidiest and most picturesque town that I visited on this trip. I think it's quite an exclusive place to live. A lot of new age shops and galleries. We then returned to Flagstaff for Picking in the Pines. We initially couldn't find Pete, but he was right down the front and centre. But he'd reserved a great spot for us where we could sit back and enjoy the concert. Molly Tuttle and Golden Highway were the headline acts.
When the man on the chest
can just make out Pete in his baseball cap down the front there, just off to the right. It was a great night. The next morning we prepared for our trip around to the north rim of the Grand Canyon and the Demote campground.
I couldn't even imagine this place in August. It would just be like a furnace in there. But hopefully, yeah, we'll be. I'm just looking for signage now for the North Rim or whatever of the Grand Canyon.
That was Pete talking to his father, who called us from Australia while we were driving. We were passing by the Vermilion Cliffs here and stopped off to check out what I think was a Navajo hut and some very interesting balancing rocks. There's the Vermilion Cliffs. We continued up onto the Kaibab Plateau and the Demote campground, just gaining that little bit of altitude, and the vegetation just completely changes. The experience on the trip was that much better because of the company. Pete, Guy and Steve were terrific and made me feel very welcome and part of the group.
I felt the chill last night for sure. I gotta find my boots, I gotta put it on, I gotta go through the zippers.
The squirrels were very playful in the morning. After breakfast we headed to the North Rim Visitors Centre, which was about a 30-minute drive from the Demote campground. Once again, Steve took his bike out to explore the area. Meanwhile, Pete, Guy and I took the narrow path out to Bright Angel Point. Looking down into Bright Angel Canyon, you can see the opposite side has lifted up higher. This is through a fault that happened about 60 million years ago, and spring water also flows down the canyon following the fault. A lot of the more detailed information like this I've gathered from either brochures that I've gathered during my trip or from plaques that have been along the trails. After checking out Bright Angel Point, we continued along a trail that took us further up. We then headed back to the lodge to have lunch, where we met up with Steve. After lunch we drove up to Imperial Point, which is the highest elevation in the Grand Canyon, at 8,803 feet, or 2,683 metres. This was our last day at the North Rim, and we came across a herd of buffalo. And there's a young calf there too. Steve wanted to take us out to somewhere he found the previous day. I think it was called Point Sublime. Let's just say the road wasn't exactly sublime. It was a beautiful area and a great adventure too. We were discussing how much further we would continue along this road because it was very rough. I think Steve was having a good time.
Hey, Canadian brass.
And that's as far as we went. I think the executive decision was made to turn around and head back because it was just going to take us too long. Next stop, Navajo Bridge, which we passed over a couple of days earlier. And you can see a couple of condors there. Navajo Bridge was built in 1928. The only individual to die during the construction of the Navajo Bridge, Leif McDaniel, a well-liked and highly experienced Kansas City ironworker, fell from near this location to the river below. And there's the condor flying overhead. A little further up the road, we stopped at Cathedral Wash, which was probably one of the most difficult hikes of the trip. That's a little too steep.
Oh, breathe.
Yeah, it's nice. Well, Steve and Pete have headed back, so it's up to Guy and me to make it to the end. Perhaps the most challenging part of the hike was just finding the right way to go down. But it was a hot day, so I'm glad we took plenty of water. Yeah, footprints. Yeah, maybe this is the way to go. I think I can hear the river.
Yeah.
Maybe. As long as there's no flash floods, I think we'll be fine. There we go. Guy and I made it to Colorado. Heading back up was a little bit easier because we knew the correct path to take. Don't know where that came from. What is it? As it was getting late, we wondered if Pete and Steve were still there waiting for us. They hadn't been waiting for us too long because Pete had his own struggles getting back to the car. Fortunately, all okay, and continued on to Page.
Oh, look at the golf course. Yeah, of course. What else does the water need to go for? Look at how plush that is. Oh my word.
Arrived at our Airbnb. The next day, Pete, Guy and I go to Antelope Canyon. So doing a Ken's tour of the lower Antelope Canyon. Not allowed to take video down there, so this is a collection of photographs. Antelope Canyon floods regularly. You can see the tails from those rocks indicating the direction of flow. In 1997, a group of 11 international hikers drowned here, ignoring flood warnings. Here our guide demonstrates how water cuts through the sandstone, forming the canyon. We exited the canyon and saw some dinosaur footprints. We headed back to Page before splitting up and doing our own things. Pete and Guy did another canyon tour. While I walked around Page, following a trail that Steve had ridden his bike on earlier in the day. Tour boat down there. Today we went to see Horseshoe Bend, perhaps the most photographed river bend in the whole world. Later we go and see Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell. To generate hydropower, Glen Canyon Dam creates a height from which the water flows through a pipe from the reservoir to the turbine, connected by a shaft to the generator which creates electricity. The next day we left Page bound for Monument Valley, but first we visited the Navajo National Monument. This is a hogan, a Navajo traditional home. A short trail leads down to a point overlooking a 13th century cliff village home to a community of Anasazi farmers. On the trail I walk through a pygmy forest, a complex community of plants and animals that dominates the high semi-arid plateaus of the American Southwest. In particular are the dwarfed, gnarled pinyon and juniper trees. We continued on to Monument Valley, briefly stopping for lunch at the Migo Cafe in Kayenta. There's Guy following us towards Monument Valley. We'll soon be saying goodbye to Guy as he heads home after our stay at the View Cabins, which have a terrific outlook across Monument Valley. These are called the mittens, as you can see with the little thumbs sticking up. Our view from the cabin. Once again, it was a great opportunity to use a long exposure on my camera to capture the stars. That bright one isn't actually a star, I believe it's Jupiter. The following morning, Pete and I got up before sunrise to take the scenic drive around the mesas and buttes. If you're a fan of Western movies, some of the scenery might look familiar. Leaving now Monument Valley. This setting might look familiar if you've seen Forrest Gump when he's running across America. This brings us to the end of part 1 of my USA tour around the Four Corner States. In part 2 we'll head into Utah